So we are very delighted to have today with us in our Bar-Ilan University Vision Science Seminar, Professor Gordon Legge from the University of Minnesota. Professor Legge has a bachelor's degree in physics from MIT, a master's degree in astronomy from Harvard, and a PhD in experimental psychology from Harvard under the supervision of Professor Mansfield. He did a postdoc at the Physiological Lab in Cambridge, working with Professor Fergus Campbell. During that time, if I understand correctly, he began a lifelong collaboration in research with colleagues including Dennis Pelly and John Foley, and learned from distinguished mentors including John Robson, Horace Barlow, Gerald Westheimer, and Matthew Alpern. After his postdoc, he joined the University of Minnesota. He's a distinguished McKnight University Professor of Psychology and Neuroscience in the Department of Psychology at the University of Minnesota and the director of the Minnesota Laboratory for Low Vision Research. He's also the founding member and scientific co-director of the Center for Applied and Translational Sensory Science, also known as CATS, aiming to link basic and clinical research. Professor Legge has supervised many PhD students and postdoc fellows. Many of them are making distinguished contributions to vision science, including to low vision. He has many publications, many with hundreds and even thousands of citations. He has an H-index of 75, according to Google Scholar. I'd like to mention the series of 20 papers he wrote that are known as the Psychophysics of Reading series that were published between 1985 and 2002. These have been summarized and reviewed in the book Psychophysics of Reading in Normal and Low Vision. In these seminal papers, he and his colleagues have discovered how key text variables such as character size, contrast, color, and font affect reading performance, and how three critical properties of vision loss impact reading, and these are low acuity, reduced contrast sensitivity, and field loss. This body of work has been widely cited and influential in both the research community and in low vision rehabilitation. One important outcome of Professor Legge's work is the design of the MN Read reading acuity chart. This instrument has become the gold standard for measuring visual reading ability. It provides measures of reading acuity, critical print size, and maximum reading speed, each which can respond differently to eye disease or therapy. MN-Read is useful in the clinic by prescribing reading aids and in research for assessing reading performance as a real-world outcome measures in clinical trials. Another important outcome of his work is the development of software and other methods for evaluating the visual accessibility of architectural spaces. He has received multiple awards in recognition of his research achievements, including an NIH Merit Award, the Lighthouse PizArt Vision Award, the Prentice Medal from the American Academy of Optometry, the Helen Keller Prize for Vision Research, the Inspirational Vision Research Award from the National Eye Institute, and more. He has served on the NIH National Advisory Eye Council and was a member of the National Research Council Committee involved with the redesign of U.S. currency bills to enhance visual accessibility. His research concerns visual perception and recognition, and with particular interest in the problems encountered by people with low vision. His projects focus on the roles of vision in reading and mobility, and the impact of impaired vision on the organization of visual centers in the brain. His research also aims to explain why different eye diseases result in serious reading problems. He addresses these issues with psychophysics, computational modeling, and brain imaging methods as fMRI. While there is so much more to say about Professor Legge's work, I will stop here and want to welcome you, Gordon, to our seminar. We are delighted to have you here and hear about your interesting and important research. Thank you for joining us. And please, before we begin, I would like to ask everyone in the audience that if you have any question during or after the talk, please write that in the chat if you have a question so I can moderate the Q&A during the talk. Please also do not unmute yourself without being instructed to do so. And please, when you get the opportunity to ask, state your name first before we begin. So welcome, Gordon, and I will share the slides. Just a second. So can everybody see the slides? I hope, okay, I hope so. Let me just put this. Yes, Gordon, so we are all set to begin.
Great. Thank you, Sharon. Good morning. It's early morning here in Minneapolis. Nice spring day. And I'm going to take advantage, Sharon. You mentioned my 2007 book, but I have a new book just published this spring called Low Vision, What It's Like to Live with Vision Loss. So just a little plug to get started. Let's go to my slide 2. So I'm going to start with a little background, then I'm going to move on and talk about visual accessibility in the context of architecture and then also reading. But for background, okay, what is low vision? Well, it's really one of 3 categories of sight, the other 2 being normal or typical vision and blindness. And by blindness, I mean lack of any vision. Let's go to slide 3. 3 definitions of low vision. There are probably more out there, but a very general one would be any chronic visual impairment not correctable by lenses that affect everyday function. More specifically, inability to read newsprint at a typical reading distance of 40 centimeters with best refractive correction. This one emphasizes the importance of reading. Almost everyone with low vision has reading difficulty. And then if we want a definition in terms of acuity, a visual acuity of less than 6/12, or as we say in the US, 20/40, or a visual field restricted to 20 degrees or less. Let's go to slide 4. A little bit on prevalence, worldwide /estimates, pretty high. These are figures from about 2020. Mild low vision, maybe 6/12 to 6/18, 258 million people. It's a lot. Moderate to severe, 6/18 to 6/120, another, 295 million. And blind, this is the World Health Organization, worse than 6/120, another 43 plus million. If we go to the next slide, just some overall percentage prevalence figures. Worldwide, about 7.5% of the population thought to have low vision. Some representative figures: Canada, 5.7%, Israel, 4.3%, US, 2.2%. Okay, so the worldwide Canada and Israel figures here are based on what we call presenting visual acuity. By that, we mean acuity with whatever refractive correction or lack thereof when the person shows up for testing. So these figures include a lot of people with vision impairment due to refractive error or maybe untreated cataract. The US figures on this slide are lower percentages because they're based on best corrected visual acuity. And either way, however we count them, the big picture point here is that the prevalence of impaired vision is surprisingly high, at least surprising for many, even in countries with good health care. And by the way, these numbers are expected to rise, at least in the US, to nearly double over the next 25 years. Okay, let's go to slide 6. So my first major example deals with visual accessibility of architecture. And slide 7, this is my definition of visual accessibility. In the context of architecture, I'll define it as the use of vision to travel efficiently and safely through an environment to perceive the spatial layout of key features in the environment, and to keep track of your location and orientation in the space. Let's go to slide 8. The major factors affecting visual accessibility, of course, there'll be the visual status of the pedestrian, and that'll include acuity, contrast sensitivity, and field status. The geometrical properties of the architectural design, things like the landmarks, the objects, the obstacles, hazards in the space. Nature and arrangement of lighting, both natural and artificial. Surface properties, color, texture, gloss, so forth, and also contextual cues within the space. So let's go to number 9, slide 9. So let's look at this is an example to illustrate kind of the concept of visual accessibility. So the slide here is showing an indoor scene at 4 times during a summer morning, a July morning. I think these scenes are probably all easy to interpret with normal vision. We're looking down a hallway in my campus building at the University of Minnesota. There are glass doors to the outside on the left, and there's an open downward staircase to the right. So we look at the upper left at 7:30 a.m. There's no direct sunlight near those stairs. By 8:50 a.m., the upper right, there are bright patches of sunlight on the carpet and near the step, the step down. There are strong shadow edges, potentially producing false cues to steps or obstacles. And then at 9:32 a.m., the lower left, the pattern has changed again with the steps down now in deep shadow. And then by 10:25 a.m., the dark carpet is bounded by sun, producing kind of a dark rectangular profile that nearly matches the stairwell aperture. So these are enormous lighting and pattern variations. They might be confusing to someone with low vision, and might actually hide the presence of those stairs down. So let's go to slide 10. So this will be the same series of images, now blurred severely to represent the information for someone with very low acuity, somebody like me. The 3D cues are mostly gone. The carpet and the stairwell look like similar objects. The sunlight at 8:50 and 9:32, it creates kind of an abstract painting of light and dark features. So someone with severe low vision arriving for the first time might not have a clue that there's a stairwell lurking there. And in fact, we had an older man with low vision visiting our building. He discovered the stairs, but referred to them as the steps from hell. Maybe better to say the steps to hell. Okay, let's go to number 11. So I was PI on a major project with colleagues listed here. These are colleagues from the University of Minnesota, University of Utah, and Indiana University. In our project, we were asking how architects might take low vision into account in their designs. And let's go to slide 12. So 2 approaches here for lighting and low vision. Illumination design, it's kind of the traditional approach. As probably you know, most lighting standards are based on overall light levels. So for example, you might take a light meter and measure levels in lux at a few key surface locations in the space and be sure that they meet illumination standards. And of course, it does matter whether the space is dim or bright. Illumination design ensures that there is adequate light overall. But we realized in our project that factors in addition to overall light level need to be taken into account to assess visual accessibility. So what we call luminance design is a somewhat new approach. It predicts the visibility of a hazard and also takes into account several key features beyond overall light level. For instance, the viewing location and vision status of the observer, the size of the hazard, actually its visual angle at the viewing point, and also the luminance contrast of the hazard with its background. So luminance design is computationally challenging. It's rarely been used in architectural practice. So our goal was to provide architects with software to make luminance design feasible. So what I'd like to do is outline the steps we use to implement this idea of luminance design. So let's go to slide 13. Okay, architectural design usually begins with a 3D model in software. Our approach requires accurate representation of luminance values at all points in the space. Most CAD software doesn't retain accurate luminance data. So we're using design software called Radiance, which includes both the 3D geometry of the space and uses ray tracing to preserve accurate luminance information about targets and backgrounds in the space. So this slide shows a radiance rendering of a Washington, D.C. subway station. So my project colleague, Rob Shakespeare, visited this actual station, took physical measurements, and created this model in software. So what I'm going to focus on for this example are two potential hazards for a low vision pedestrian. There's a bench in the lower left, might be difficult to see. And then there's a post in the middle of the platform. Let's go to slide 14. So this slide summarizes our software pipeline. The goal here is for the software to predict what hazards are not visible for someone with low vision, what they would miss seeing. So the top left shows this radiance rendering of the Washington, D.C. subway station, again, the one we just saw. It's the input to the software, and there are really two paths in the computational flow shown by the arrows. So first on the left side, the left path, the Radiance software, the Radiance model contains information about distances and orientation of surfaces in the scene. So computational analysis finds depth discontinuities, such as the edge of the bench and the boundary of that post. The middle left panel in the slide here, I think it's labeled geometrical edges, shows essentially the depth discontinuities found by the software. So it's this depth map that provides clues to the hazards in the space. So if we take the right-hand path, let's first look at that upper right panel. The input image, the subway image, is filtered to represent the contrast sensitivity and acuity of a low vision observer. An example of the filtered image is shown at the top right. excuse me. This filter uses the contrast sensitivity function, or CSF, of a hypothetical low vision pedestrian. And in this particular case, I think the acuity that we used for this particular filter was something like 20/300 in US notation. So let me just digress very briefly to ask, what contrast sensitivity function should we use for someone with low vision? So if we go to slide 15, Susanna Chung and I have shown that low vision contrast sensitivity functions can often be approximated as shifted versions of a normal CSF curve. A leftward shift along the spatial frequency axis is related to reduced acuity, and a downward shift is related to reduced contrast sensitivity. So we can use clinical measures of acuity and contrast sensitivity to customize our filter for different levels of low vision. Okay, slide 16. This is repeating what we saw earlier. So after we have this filtered image to represent the low vision visibility, the next step is to find the luminance cues or contrast edges that are still visible in the filtered image. So the middle panel on the right, which is labeled luminous boundaries, is the output of an edge detecting algorithm showing which contrast edges will be visible to the low vision observer. So then our algorithm compares the map of geometrical edges, that middle left panel, with the map of visible contrast edges, the middle right. And if there's a match, the geometrical feature is predicted to be visible. So the bottom panel shows the output of this matching process. When a contrast edge matches a depth edge, we label the depth edge green, meaning that it's predicted to be visible. And when there's no match, that, in other words, no visible contrast corresponding to the depth edge, the 3D feature is labeled red, indicating that it's not visible to the person with low vision. So in this particular example, I think most of the bench geometry is labeled red, not visible, and post is labeled green, visible. So the idea is that an architect could submit their design to this software, plus information about acuity and contrast sensitivity of potential pedestrians in the space, and then get an output with red and green labels indicating what's likely to be visible and what's likely to be invisible for those particular pedestrians. We've also developed a numerical measure of visibility, and let's go to slide 17. This is just a numerical representation that we call a hazard visibility score. It ranges from 0, not visible, to 1, highly visible. And this score is kind of based on the degree of adjacency of a luminance boundary in the filtered image and a corresponding geometrical boundary in the depth map. And then we average across the geometrical structure in a region of interest. So we tried to validate this approach. We asked whether this HVS score and whether this red and green labeling actually predicts what people with actual low vision see. We conducted a validation study, actually conducted by one of my former PhD students, Seun Liu. If we go to slide 18, We'll talk a little bit about this study. In this validation study, subjects viewed a computer display with radiance-generated images of a walkway simulating a viewpoint 10 feet from a target. So in separate trials, an image contained one of 5 targets ahead on the walkway, either a big or a small step up, a big or a small step down, or a smooth continuation of the walkway. So the subject in any given trial indicated which type of step they thought was present in the image. We also introduced some variations in lighting and viewpoint. In the study, each subject actually saw 250 test images, and our model generated a hazard visibility score for each subject and each test image. So if we go to slide 19 for some results, the panels here are logistic regression models for our 10 subjects. We have percent correct target recognition plotted against this hazard visibility score. And if our algorithm has some validity, accuracy should increase with higher HVS score, meaning better visibility. And yes, the curves all rise with increasing HVS score. So this little experiment begins to validate our computational analysis. It seems like the HVS scores do indeed predict the performance of low vision subjects in identifying, at least in this case, stepping hazards ahead. Okay, slide 20. We're going to shift gears here a little bit. Now I'm going to turn to reading accessibility. Of course, as we know, reading requires good acuity. And as I mentioned earlier, it poses problems for almost everybody with low vision. If we think back historically, after the invention of the printing press in the 1400s, the ability to read printed text became pretty crucial to education and employment, and lack of accessibility to print has excluded many people with impaired vision from mainstream functionality. And actually, for a very long time, not much could be done to make hard copy print accessible. Of course, there were some analog solutions for this problem. Development of optical aids, optical magnifiers, large print books, and of course, invention of Braille. But the modern electronic era has actually enhanced accessibility. First, it moved text from hard copy onto video screens where it could be manipulated visually, and then into digital representations where text could be customized visually or converted to audio or Braille. By the way, I use all of those formats. So let me sort of push into this by asking, how do we go about measuring low vision reading in the clinic or lab? So if we go to slide 21, this slide lists several tests that have been developed to assess aspects of reading vision. Several of these tests measure reading speed in words per minute. It turns out that reading speed for simple sentences is sensitive to both vision status and text properties. And let's go to slide 22. This slide shows the MN read chart for measuring reading speed at different print sizes. So MN Read was developed in my lab. It's my baby. My lab at the University of Minnesota. It was developed in the early 1990s. The chart uses the logarithmic progression of print sizes used in modern eye chart design, but in this case with continuous text rather than individual unrelated letters. Each print size has a sentence composed of exactly 60 characters with simple vocabulary suitable for adults and also children down to about 8 years of age. The chart is printed on two sides with 19 print sizes, and at a viewing distance of typical viewing distance or standard viewing distance of 40 centimeters, the X height of the print ranges from logmar 1.3, or in American notation, Snellen 20 over 400. That's at the big print end, down to minus 0.5 logmar at the tiny end, or 20 over 6 print in the US notation. For severe low vision, the big print range can be extended by using a shorter viewing distance. For example, if you test somebody at 10 centimeters rather than 40, the big print extends to Snellen 20 over 1600. So when using this test, the subject is instructed to read the sentences aloud as quickly and accurately as possible. The examiner records the time taken to read the sentence and number of errors, if any, and then these times and error counts are used to compute a reading speed in words per minute. So let's go to slide 23. So this slide shows sample data. We have data for one normally sighted subject, upper curve, and one subject with age-related macular degeneration, AMD, the lower curve. So in the graph here, we have reading speed in words per minute plotted on the vertical scale, and print size is shown on the, actually, I think on the lower x-axis in the logmar units, and American Snellen notation on the top. The AMD curve lies below the normal curve and seems to be shifted to the right. Both curves, though, have kind of a typical shape. If we go from left to right, basically from small to large print, the reading speed rises rapidly as print gets bigger, and then becomes stable or flat at a large print size. So we usually characterize these plots with three salient features relevant to reading performance. First, the reading acuity, that's the smallest print size at which the person can read at all. And that'd be shown by the open arrows at the left end of each of these curves. And this reading acuity is usually pretty highly correlated with typical letter acuity from the standard letter charts. Second feature is what we call the critical print size, or sometimes we abbreviate it to CPS, critical print size. It occurs at the bend in the curve, and it's shown by the filled arrows. And it indicates the smallest print size for which this person can achieve their maximum reading speed. And then the critical, this critical print size is sometimes substantially larger than the reading acuity. The third salient feature is what we call the maximum reading speed, and it's shown by the dashed lines indicating the y-axis values of the flat portions of the curve. So I think in this case, the normally sighted curve, the upper one, has a maximum reading speed near 300 words per minute, and the AMD subject near 100 words per minute. So two things to notice two important differences between the normal and AMD curves. First, the AMD person, lower curve, has a larger critical print size. So this means they need bigger print for reading. Magnification is necessary for almost everyone with low vision to read. And this critical print size is kind of a specification of the magnifier requirement of that person. Second point, even with adequate magnification, this AMD reader has a much lower maximum reading speed than the normal observer. In this case, the flat portion of the AMD curve lies quite a bit below the flat portion of the curve for the normally sighted observer. So apparently something other than print size is limiting AMD reading speed. And I'll get back to this in a minute, what that something else might be. I should mention that there are now versions of this MN read test in quite a few different languages. There's also an iPad version of this test. And by the way, we don't yet have a version of MN read in Hebrew. Okay, let's go to the next slide. I'm going to turn to consideration of display size. Computers and closed circuit TV magnifiers, they're great for magnification. Turn a knob or pinch to zoom. Problem though, the bigger the letters, the fewer of them that fit on the display. So let's go to slide 25. So slide 25 shows a highly magnified text on my computer display. So at my short viewing distance, the letters each subtend about 6 degrees of visual angle, and there are only about 14 character spaces visible on each line. I might also mention, you might notice that I use reverse contrast text. I use bright letters on a dark background. Many people with low vision seem to read better with reverse contrast text. So this option of contrast reversal is an advantage of electronic displays over optical aids for people with low vision. Anyway, the need for this high magnification trades off against the number of characters displayed on each line. So, of course, one way of dealing with this trade-off is to simply use a bigger display. And many people with low vision actually invest in large computer displays. But of course, people with low vision also want to use portable devices with small screens, laptops, tablets, cell phones, and the like. With my high magnification illustrated on this slide, it's pretty clear that I can see only a portion of the line of text. So what I need to do, I need to use my mouse to scroll horizontally to see the rest of the line. So this requirement for manual scrolling imposes a burden on reading for me and for others who use highly magnified computer text. And we refer to this need for manual scrolling as the page navigation problem. So one way around this might be to format the text onto shorter lines that entirely fit on my screen. And in fact, some e-readers or web pages can be designed to use word wrapping for this purpose. And this would reduce the demand for this horizontal scrolling or page navigation. But this word wrapping solution raises the question of how many characters per line are required to achieve maximum reading speed. So presumably if there are too few characters per line, reading will slow down. So where's the trade-off? So let's go to slide 26. So we studied this trade-off between print size and display size. In this study, we tested 30 normally sighted and 10 low vision subjects. We tested the normally sighted people with both regular viewing and also blur to simulate reduced acuity. We measured reading speed for 8 print sizes and 3 display sizes, roughly corresponding to laptop, tablet, and cell phones display sizes. And for each combination of print size and display size, we measured reading speed using passages from Grimm's fairy tales. So for each print size, we wanted to discover the display size measured in terms of number of characters per line required to achieve maximum reading speed. And the results of this study turned out to be quite straightforward. We found that an individual's maximum reading speed must meet 2 constraints. First of all, the print size must exceed the individual's critical print size. The letters need to be big enough. And the display must be large enough to accommodate at least 13 characters per line. We refer to this as the critical character count. And actually, this critical value of 13 characters is kind of an upper bound. Some people with low vision could achieve their maximum reading speed with somewhat fewer than 13 characters per line. So if you'll recall that for the example of text on my own computer display, the one I showed earlier, I had about 14 characters per line at my preferred magnification. So if word wrapping were in place, this would have been sufficient for me to achieve my maximum reading speed. Let's go to slide 27. So this slide just lists a couple of publications from this study. These publications describe how we analyzed and modeled our data to work out the joint constraints and how these constraints could be used by people with low vision for selecting display configurations. And if we go to slide 28, we developed a web-based app to allow clinicians or rehab specialists or people with low vision themselves to estimate the display sizes and print sizes they would need for fluent reading. This app, it's called My Reading Display. So if you log into this app, the user enters acuity, preferred viewing distance, preferred font, if any, and then the app calculates the minimum display size required to meet the dual constraints of print size and display size. So if anybody's interested, you can look up this and give it a try, My Reading Display. Let's go to slide 29, please, Sharon. Okay, macular degeneration. Leading cause of low vision, at least in the US, and in its advanced forms results in central field loss. Most people with AMD have reading difficulty. I think I mentioned that earlier. If we go to slide 30, this is a repeat of what we looked at earlier. These are the MN read curves. Remember the normal on top of the person with AMD below. And I mentioned that the AMD person has a maximum reading speed well below the normal participant or subject. So why do people with central field loss often read slowly, even when print size is large enough to exceed their critical print size, and they have adequate display size? In other words, they have adequate magnification, but they're still reading below normal rates. Several factors might be playing a role here. Research in my lab and elsewhere has shown that something we refer to as the size of the visual span is one important factor that's probably limiting AMD reading speed. So let's go to slide 31. So this slide, the goal here is to provide some intuition about this concept of visual span. So on the left panel shows what information is available in a single text fixation by a normally sighted person. And we refer to this as information in the visual span. So there's only a small region within the overall visual field in which text letters can be accurately recognized at a given instant or in a given fixation. And for people with normal vision, this region is only maybe 8 to 10 letters wide. We call that the visual span. And outside this region, interference from crowding means that letters are too indistinct to be recognized reliably. So this limited visual span means that those of you with normal vision, you need to move your eyes through the text, making a series of saccades and fixations. Okay, the right panel is showing kind of a simulation of reading with a central scotoma or central blind spot. And in this case, the 2D geometry of the normal visual span becomes kind of ring-shaped. It's no longer possible to recognize all the letters on a horizontal line of text passing through the center of the normal visual span or through the fovea. Now, the reader in this case with the central scotoma, they might attend to a region of retina left or right of the scotoma or above or below the scotoma. And this point of changed point of attention is usually referred to as the preferred retinal locus, or PRL. The PRL is usually near the edge of the scotoma, but for any location of the PRL outside the scotoma, we would expect that the number of recognizable letters, in other words, the size of this visual span, it would be smaller than the visual span of 8 or 10 for the normally sighted reader. So we developed psychophysical methods for estimating the size of visual spans for both normally sighted and low vision. If we go to slide 32, kind of illustrates how we do this. The top panel shows basically how we measure the visual span. So in a measurement, the stimuli are briefly flashed trigrams, or in other words, random strings of 3 letters. The subject reports all 3 letters of the trigram. We use strings of letters rather than single letters because of their closer approximation to fragments of English text. And then we measure performance for trigrams at different horizontal locations, left and right of fixation. For instance, I think in the slide, the trigram TGU is positioned with the G at 5 letter positions right of fixation. And then across a block of maybe 200 trials, something like that, we work out percent correct at each letter position left or right of fixation. And we refer to the resulting plot of letter accuracy versus letter position as a visual span profile. So the blue curve on the slide here shows a typical visual span profile for somebody with normal central vision. Profile, as you would expect, is peaked at fixation, where letter recognition is best, and then drops off to the left or right, representing decreasing reliability of letter recognition away from the point of fixation. And the area under this curve is what we refer to as kind of a measure of the amount of letter information available on each fixation, or the visual span. So we can measure these visual span profiles for people with normal vision under normal vision or reduced viewing conditions. And we can also measure these visual spans for people with low vision. We typically find a pretty good correlation between the size of the visual span, or the area under these profiles, and reading speed. So intuitively, as this visual span, as a person's visual span gets smaller, you're recognizing fewer letters on each eye fixation, and you need more fixations to step through text. So we hypothesized that people with central field loss, macular degeneration, who must rely on peripheral vision, would have narrower visual spans for reading. So let's go to slide 33. So in a study we conducted a number of years ago, this is Alan Cheung, who was in my postdoc in my lab at that time. We measured visual span profiles for a group of AMD participants with central field loss. And this slide shows visual span profiles in yellow for 4 AMD subjects. The white profiles are average visual spans for a group of, I think it was 5 age-matched controls at corresponding print sizes. The gray bars show the position of scotomas relative to the PRLs of these AMD participants. And as we predicted, the AMD curves lie below the normal curves, representing a reduced amount of letter information per fixation for reading. And there were also localized depressions in the visual span profiles for the AMD participants that corresponded to scotomas in their visual field maps. So when we originally did this study, we thought that this reduced size of the visual span in AMD might be sufficient to account for AMD deficits in reading speed. But later we decided that there's probably also a temporal deficit in AMD reading, an abnormal slowing down in recognizing letters and words, possibly related to fixation instability. Now I'm currently working on a project here at Minnesota with my colleague Steve Engel and others. It follows from this earlier work on visual spans in AMD, and it builds on an idea initiated years ago by NASA on text remapping. So the idea of our current study is to remap text that would be hidden by a central scotoma so that the missing letters or hidden letters are imaged on functioning retina outside the scotoma. So this is an approach that requires tracking eye position and remapping text in real time as the eyes move. So it's technically fairly challenging. As part of this project, we're implementing what we term personalized remapping, taking into account the characteristics of an individual person's central field loss. So let's go to the next slide, which I'm nearly done here, illustrating this personalized remapping schemes. So this slide is kind of a cartoon illustrating the general idea of personalized remapping. The gray blobs are scotomas of different shapes. With the case of no remapping on the left in each case, and different types of remapping on the right. And in each case, the red star represents the PRL, or point of preferred retinal locus, on the left of the scotoma, where the person is attending. So in the top pair, the top row, we have a circular scotoma. Letters of the attended word are remapped, in this case, on the curved path around the bottom of the scotoma on the right, rather than being lost into the scotoma. So this remapping of the text allows more letters to be recognized on each fixation. So the idea is we're effectively increasing the visual span for this person with this remapping. And in the middle row, where we have a horizontally extended or wider scotoma, the remapped letters are displaced down to a horizontal line below the elongated scotoma. And in the bottom row, we have a narrow vertical scotoma, or cartoon of a scotoma. In this case, we split the word horizontally so that no letters disappear in the scotoma. We remap across the scotoma. These remapping strategies, obviously they're introducing deviations from conventional horizontal lines of text. So it's an empirical question how much these deviations affect reading performance. Our results so far are promising, at least in some respects. We have results that show that remapping strategies like this, customized to a person's pattern of central field loss, do enhance word recognition accuracy. Sentence reading is more challenging because of the need to adapt eye movements to remapping. So that's something we're currently working on, trying to determine whether these remapping schemes are compatible with eye movement control through text. So let's go to my last slide, some very, very brief conclusions to wrap up. First of all, low vision affects a large and actually growing number of people worldwide. Vision science can contribute to their quality of life by guiding designs that enhance the accessibility of architectural spaces and other public spaces, and also for displays of text. And I'm going to hold it there, and I'm done.
Gordon, thank you so much for this wonderful and very interesting talk. And I am inviting everybody to unmute yourself. Is it okay that I stop sharing at the moment?
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to invite everybody to unmute yourself and to give Gordon a big applaud for a really great and interesting talk. And at the moment, if there are people who want to ask questions, are you happy to take questions, by the way?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay,
Happy.
great. So I do see that there's one thing in the chat. So Ellie wrote, okay, sorry to miss the discussion, Sharon. I'm glad to see, okay. Anyway, so great talk, and I understand that Ellie may have needed to leave early. Okay, so yeah, that was and I see Sarit has a question. So Sarit Shapiro from University of Haifa, do you wanna ask?
Yeah, sure. I have a few questions.
Yeah, good.
The first about the first project on architecture. How do you think this project can help when there's different lighting conditions? Because the example was like a tunnel, but when you look at a real building, you have sunlight, and as you actually had in your
Yeah.
example, this has shading that differs. So that's one question. And then a few more questions about the last project with AMD. I was wondering about, so the acuity, I assume, is also reduced
Yeah.
in AMD, even in the field that is not with the scotoma.
Yeah.
And I also assume that the calibration is very difficult to perform. So how can you account for that both in when doing the calibration and the test and for an assistive technology?
Okay, yeah, both very interesting questions. So for lighting, the idea would be that an architect, if they have an appropriate software, can simulate lighting at different times of the day and do this assessment of hazard visibility uh, based on a variety of lighting times. In fact, my colleague Rob Shakespeare, who's a lighting design expert, uses this software and runs it for a different time intervals during the day if there's variations, let's say due to lighting. In fact, there can be enormous variations, like in my example.
Yeah.
So the idea would be, okay, what are the worst cases and can we design around those worst cases? So definitely an important issue, and thank you for raising that one. Um, Regarding the AMD, yes. So when we do this study, at least on the remapping one I was talking about at the end, first of all, we find uh, a suitable print size. So we we actually measure their reading speed curves and find their critical print size and use text that's magnified to meet their requirements. Calibration, yes, is in fact a challenging issue because to do eye tracking, which is necessary for this remapping, you have to be able to uh, do calibration so the eye tracker can follow the eyes. And some of we just have not been, we're not able to calibrate the eye tracker with all of the AMD subjects, sometimes because the fixation is too unstable. So that is definitely a limiting uh, part of this remapping idea.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jeremy Wolf, I assume, yeah, do you wanna go ahead and ask?
Sure. Hi, Gordon.
Hi, Jeremy.
The I was wondering in the sort of steps to hell example,
Yeah.
and in those sort of pedestrian examples in general, how much help do you get from optic flow and motion parallax and things like that?
Oh, yeah, interesting question. So most of the stuff we did in that project was static viewing. We did one empirical study um, where we compared static viewing of real physical steps and ramps ahead with performance of people who walked up and stopped and then made a judgment. In fact, they actually the motion associated with the self motion they did better. In other words, compare a static view of steps ahead with walking up and then making a judgment about steps up or down ahead. And empirically, we found that people did better after walking up and then making the judgment. So we infer that some kind of motion cue, whether optic flow or something else, actually does help. And we also had a student working on motion parallax as a cue for people with impaired vision. Like people with impaired vision usually have poor or no stereo. So we wondered if motion parallax might help. And under some very controlled situations, yes, we can demonstrate it. At least in one preliminary study, it was hard to demonstrate in a more realistic context. But from my own personal experience, I'm convinced that motion parallax is helpful. I mean, I myself use it. At least I believe I'm using it fairly frequently. So I think motion parallax is valuable for people with impaired vision.
Thanks.
Great. Mark, before we turn to you, there's a question in the chat. So Chagit wrote, Chagit Helor from University of Haifa wrote, great talk regarding the remapping. Is there a period of adaptation to adopt to the new positioning style of the letters? When reading, the remapping must change quickly. I assume that there are different visual effects on the reader. Is it disturbing? Do they adapt? And which version is more user-friendly?
That's a great question. So actually, this is what we're working on now. We call it a training or learning procedure. So reading single words the remapping is fine because you're just looking at a spot, the word flashes and you read it. You don't have to track across a line of text. When you start tracking along a line of text, and if the text is remapped below or above your scotoma, there's an initial tendency to want to move your gaze up or down, and you have to ultimately suppress that. So adaptation or training is required, and that's part of our empirical work right now. We have a whole bunch of data now on, we call it the training study. Can people learn to adapt their eye movements? Now, in the case of one of the examples I showed on one of those last slides, where we keep horizontal text and just jump it across the scotoma so we don't lose any letters. We call it the horizontal gap or H gap. People seem to adapt to that more easily because now the lines are remaining horizontal. There's none of this diverting of text above or below the line. So that seems to be easier to adapt to. And on the whole, at least prior to training with this kind of reading, seems to be the easier kind of remapping to work with. That's very interesting, crucial question that we're working on right now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm waiting to hear more on the results of that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mark, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Mark Greenlee from the University of Regensburg in Germany. Hi, Gordon.
Hi, Mark.
Very interesting talk. I'm just wondering to what extent your architecture design has taken in multisensory aspects that could help. I mean, you know the tactile thing with in German train stations, for instance, we have these bright yellow tactile tiles to warn people with other sensory cues. Is this something that also falls into your reasoning with the architecture issue, or is that sort of a default that you just expect if vision can't help them, then they have to fall back onto multisensory cues?
Yeah, that's a great, important and practical question. So with our work, we focused primarily on visual aspects of hazards or features. Now, one thing, so we haven't really considered the multisensory aspects. I will note, even here in Minneapolis, we have tactile domes at crossings that are helpful by touch or with a white cane. For me, the color contrast of the domes they use here is very poor. So I like the yellow ones or the bright red ones we see maybe in Europe or other cities. So I think color luminance contrast can be coupled with tactile cues to enhance accessibility in a multisensory way. But in our project, we didn't consider those kinds of interactions. But in the real world, they're definitely very important. Thanks for that question, Mark.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. I also want to ask if that's okay. Regarding the PLR, do people have the same PLR because you're talking about like two, I think of extreme differences between reading, which relies on foveal vision, and navigation, which goes with like more peripheral vision. And I wonder if the PLR for these two very different types of visual functions is the same in people with macular degeneration.
So that's an open question. Even the way you measure these preferred retinal locus, in practice, you have somebody do a fixation task and you see what part of the retina is the target falling on. And that's the classical way of determining the location of the preferred retinal locus. And even in reading, we don't know whether that same retinal location is the point of attention. I have a student, Arda Fidanci, who just finished a project, just published a paper, I guess last year, showing that for most AMD, that what we call a fixation PRL, where you're looking at a fixation task, is actually used in reading. Now, whether that same retinal location is the point of attention in all other tasks remains to be determined. There's some reports out there that people use multiple PRLs. Maybe it's task specific for watching TV or navigation. So I think it's still an unresolved but important question regarding use of peripheral vision for people with AMD. So thank you. That's a great and important question, not entirely resolved.
Thank you so much. Gordon, I really want to thank you for joining us and for this, fascinating talk. Thank you everybody also for joining. And next week we will not have a talk because there's VSS. And the week after we'll have Professor Jesse Taubert from Australia who will be joining us at, again, a challenging hour. So again, Gordon, thank you so much for this wonderful talk, and everybody have a lovely rest of the week.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. And yeah, people are clapping, but some of them are muted, so it's hard to. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Bye.